Morning, Wolf. Are you on?
This is Saku Wolf-san.
Wu, how are you? Good morning. I'm Jeff Gauss. How are you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Where are you calling in from?
I am from Gaithersburg, Maryland.
I know right where that is. I'm a former East Coaster, Pennsylvania, so I know where you are.
All
Hi,
right.
Saku and Jeff. This is John Fink.
John, how you
Hi,
doing?
John.
Good. Hey, Saku, do you know anybody in I think it's the PSRC, Public Safety, or PSCR, I guess, the Public
Yeah, sure.
Safety?
I know
Um,
a few folks there. Yeah,
if I send you a separate email, could you introduce me to them?
yeah, I can. Certainly.
Great. Great.
Excellent. We're getting some critical mass, so good to hear you guys.
Are you saying I'm dead weight? Is that what you're telling me?
Hey, Jeff.
How you doing, Will?
Doing good, thanks.
Hey, Will.
Hi,
John.
Cool. Let's
Hey,
give it
Will.
1 minute. Go
Will,
ahead.
I'm going to talk in code. The conversation you and I had about another venture studio. Let's just say that the parties are intrigued.
Excellent.
So stay tuned.
Yeah, let's talk later today if we can find a spot.
Well, I don't have anything material yet. So give me about a week, and
Okay.
I'll have a little bit more for you.
Exciting. Thank you.
Yep.
Good. Well, I think we're getting to critical mass, Saku. If you we're not so that today we're only going to have the one presentation. Corey Marshall from Splunk for Good had to cancel, and we were a little squeezed anyhow. So Saku is going to take this time slot. We'll have some good time for questions and answers. So I think it'll be a good session. We may end a little bit early, but I think that's good for all of us. So Saku, if I could hand it over to you, and maybe you can get us going.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Wolf, and thanks everybody. Today I am going to talk about one of the NIST Smart City initiatives and programs, and why NIST is interested in this activity of a city platform, and why am I even spending time on this call every month, and what is our objectives, and what is the end goal that we are trying to see. So I am Saku Ri. For those who are not familiar with me, I run a program called the Global City Teams Challenge, led by NIST with other federal agencies. I am essentially the go-to person for smart cities at NIST. In some cases, other federal agencies refer to me too. I'm going to talk about something called IES-City framework. It's a abbreviation of Internet of Things enabled smart city framework, and this is going to take about 2/3 of the presentation. But bear with me, because understanding this Yes City framework from NIST is critical in understanding why NIST is involved in this city platform activity. Okay, so Yes City, IoT-enabled smart city framework. The problem is smart city technologies are being developed and deployed at a rapid pace, but then many of these deployments are custom solutions and isolated and fragmented. And there are a number of architecture design efforts and solutions and platform efforts underway. Some of them are even being deployed, but they are not converging. So NIST and its partners, you can see the list of them that have participated in this effort for the last 3 years, has convened a public working group to distill the common set of architecture features from these architectural efforts. Now, it is important to understand that our goal was not to create another platform or architecture. We hate divergence. We want convergence. So what we wanted to do was bring these folks together and figure out what are the common elements of these different architectures? And if you can understand the common elements, and if you can generalize it, then those generalized elements can become the principle of convergence going forward. That was the whole point. So that included Fireware, which is a European outfit with an open source platform. I believe they are participating in this effort as well. MSIP is actually Korean Ministry of Science and Information, the ministry. And obviously they lead efforts in South Korea in a lot of the technology and emerging technology issues. And NIST, obviously, and IES-City is a European, the organization working on standards. ANSI is a US organization, obviously working on standard as well, and also US Green Building Council. NENEA is a Italian standard organization. I think it is a government agency actually. And TIA is a global, mostly in the US, but also global standard organization for technologies. So the goal was a reference framework for the development of incremental and composable smart cities. Now, we already talked about the challenge. So this is the landscape. I mean, there are so many companies and technologies and solutions out there. And I'm not trying to scare anybody off because probably many of you already understand what I'm talking about. This was put together back in 2016 by one of the venture capitalists. Now, probably this diagram is probably doubled in many sense. So, what are we trying to accomplish at NIST? So there are two the activities at NIST that on smart cities. One is the market-driven activity to encourage the convergence. We are all about convergence and standards. So how do we do this? So we look at market and we look at technology as well. So first, we started with a market-driven activities, created action clusters, super clusters. Back in 2014, we started with a small application. Year in 2015, 2016, we started to bring them together on action cluster. Year in 2017, we coalesced those action clusters around the domains of interest, transportation and so on, the super clusters. And 2018, we are adding security and privacy. And next year, actually 2019, 2020, we are walking toward what we call smart region. So it's a collaboration of cities and coalition of cities. So as you can see, we are all about convergence. We have worked on the market perspective. Now, at the onset or at the side effort of that, or you can even say is offspring of GCTC, it's a technology-driven activities called the IES-City framework. Now, what we are trying to do is, again, we are trying to analyze the existing platforms and architectures and provide a set of tools to make it easier. So, IES-City framework consists of two parts. One is the document. It's a framework document that explains all the principles and all what we have done in terms of the principles and so on. And it also includes a set of artifacts. Artifacts can be a spreadsheet, it could be a small application and so on. Now, let me explain to you one concept which is central to IES-City framework. It is called the pivotal points of interoperability. It's a PPI. It's a very easy concept. All these different things that you see on the screen as different types of architectures and different types of solutions and platforms. Now, they're independent technology deployments. And there are a lot of distances from good interoperability. Now, if we can figure out what are the common or maybe close points of interoperability, it may not be completely interoperable, but there may be some points in this whole complete architecture that everybody thinks is important no matter which architecture you use. So that's what we call pivotal point of interoperability. Now, if you tie the different architectures around that PPI, then we may have a good interoperability. We may actually have some possibility of interoperability. That's the whole point. So example is, think of it as a TCP/IP. It's pretty easy to understand. Internet is huge suite of various different things. Now, if you look at it, but there are several pieces in the layers, points in the layers that provides a critical interoperability. TCP/IP is one piece of it. So that's what you're trying to figure out. What are those? Now, minimize the distance of interoperability by collaboration and by providing a common the analysis. That's what you're trying to get. If that happens, we can, again, all these different vendors and different architectures can come with their own solutions, with their advantages and disadvantages and so on. But as long as we can simply figure out this PPI, we can at least come up with some solutions that cities can, that don't have to go everywhere else to figure out where they have to even start. So expansion of this PPI concept is called the zones of concern. So again, pretty simple. PPI is a concept, but at the end of the day, when you look at actual solutions, what are the tangible the points, tangible pieces that we can call PPI? So for example, is that at the device level, or is it at the application level, or maybe is it at the level of a platform, or maybe it's at the level of API. So that's what we call zones of concern. Maybe it's key groupings for app developers, infrastructure providers, and device manufacturers. So it's sort of like the more real and tangible, beyond is just the concept. So how do we do this? So the IES-City framework provides a number of tools. So what we did was we worked with several existing architecture providers. As you can see, AWS and FileWare, OneM2M, OpenIoT, and so on. And we provided a set of example concerns or aspects that can be physical, that is, and we talk can be network interoperability, that's application level interoperability, and so on. And we asked them to fill out the form, this spreadsheet, and where they fit, or they may not have it, or they may have multiple. So once we figure this out, then we can look at, hey, which layer has the most the common shared aspects. Then we can figure out what is the best possible, which layer or which piece has the best probability to become PPI. So this is essentially a spreadsheet. As you can see, these companies filled it up, and they actually filled it with the specific technologies, whether they're using REST technology, they're using XGSN, so on. And then once they fill it up, now you can map. You can basically select PPI, select the zones of concern, and then you can map it up on top of existing architectures like AWS in this case, or in terms of OneM2M, and in terms of synchronicity, so on, Espresso. What we have figured out during this process is, out of those dozens of different architectures that represented many different types of applications, we figured out, it's pretty much expected, they are not that different in terms of the big picture. I mean, start with some physical devices or physical representation. Bring in communication systems, and bring in data, bring in analytics, and there's an application service and domain services. That's really pretty much what it is if you look at any of these architectures. And there are cybersecurity, privacy issues, which are cross-cutting to many of these zones. So that's the one tool we provided. And then there's also application framework that we came up with. So the question comes down to, let's look at from the user's perspective. When a city or city managers look at solution providers or architectures or platforms, how do they choose these solutions? Is there any commonly agreeable approach to come up with this type of the selection process? Again, I'm not talking about selection process of specific vendor, but at least they need to understand what are the benefits, and how do we identify right solutions to accomplish or create those benefits for the cities. So the application framework is composed of 3 steps. First, evaluate the use cases. Second, identify the needs of the cities. Third, measure the potential benefits or expected benefits of those solutions. Now, how do we do that? So that's what application framework gives a path or tools to make it to figure out how to do this. So at the end of the day, under the hood, you have to go through 3 steps for analysis. First, you have to understand what are the applications and related metrics. So, for example, are we talking about smart trash can? Are we talking about water meters? Are we talking about transportation traffic management solutions? So we have to understand what are the concerns of this city. Secondly, we have to understand how ready city is. So I'll give an example. If you may want to have good traffic congestion management solution, but if you do not have a basic transportation infrastructure in the city, for example, if you do not even have a traffic lights in the city, well, you probably want to have traffic lights even before talking about traffic congestion management solutions. So that's sort of the readiness you need to assess before even talking about what's the benefit and how you go about it. So that's a list of metrics and tool of assess the readiness. Now, once you do it, then now you can start analyzing, measure the benefits. I mean, measure is probably not the right word here. It's almost like anticipate or expected benefits before you start installing it. So evaluating breadth, we already talked about why this is important. This is one of the tools that we provide in this mix. This is just a snapshot or a screenshot of one aspect. As you can see, the principle, the way, I mean, or the principle of doing all this analysis, essentially is the functional decomposition. That's what they call. So essentially, you start with a big one topic, and you decompose them into next layer of topics, and then each subtopics is also decomposed into more subtopics. So that's the basic principle of doing this analysis and matching those subtopics to the real world situation, whether the city has it or not has it, and basically do check marks or put some scoring onto that, or either way. So that's really what it does. So if you look at it, actuation, communication, functionality, these are the subcomponents of these one application, which is called the built environment and smart building. And obviously, for every application, you have a different list of these categorization. And NIST did not produce a comprehensive categorization for everything. We obviously cannot do that, but this because obviously lack of resources and time. But what NIST did in this framework is provided tools and approaches and guidelines to enable private sector to come and do this. And evaluation of the readiness is the same thing. I'm not going to go through all that, but again, this screen shows you a snapshot of one example of the readiness. It's a built environment and smart home, and this is how you evaluate the readiness as an example. Again, everything is based on functional decomposition. So virtually every application, with the help from domain experts, then you can come up with this type of decomposition matrix. Now, once you have that, now it's time to talk about benefits. So this is an example of the benefits metrics. Start with the this again. This is about it's called the public sector domain, and actually public sector is huge, but it's just an example of the and it has categories: economic benefits, environmental benefits, and social benefits. And obviously, there can be more, and each of them also has its own subcategories. And the document, which is publicly available, has examples of comprehensive and actually pretty exhaustive analysis of at least a few example domains for this. So out of this application frameworks, this is one example, wireless water meter project done by New York City. I'm not going to go through all that, but at the end of the day, what it shows is out of this process, you can see the category, and you can see the readiness, you can see the benefits, how based on this readiness, how and what kind of benefits are expected. And that's how the city managers or city officials can make a decision. Next one is from London. It's a city open data platform that could be pretty relevant to what we are doing here. So again, I'm not going to go through all that, but that's an example. This is from City of Genoa, Italy, uses Flyware platform. Again, I'm not going to go through all that, but that's how they came about, as a real world example. So this is the last slide. Why the hell are we doing this? Why am I here? Is NIST interested in the city platform group? We have spent a significant amount of time and manpower to come up with the IES-City framework. It provides a set of concepts and tools to aid the stakeholders in understanding the interoperability issues and lowering the barriers to integrating IoT and smart city features. And when I say stakeholders, it's not just the cities or community officials. It also includes technology providers, university researchers, and nonprofits, whoever is interested in improving interoperability so that the smart city stakeholders can do not have to worry about 30 different platforms around. So there is this IES-City framework includes technical methodology. Again, there are so many different ways to accomplish it. This is just one way to accomplish it. We are not saying that this is the best thing in the world. We are saying that we showed one path of at least encouraging interoperability between different platforms. And we also have an application framework tool that city officials can look at it, not just from technology developers, but city officials can look at, can take a look at it from which angle, how they can look at interoperability of the platform. So this is why NIST is interested. This is essentially a philosophy. We have been working on it, and the philosophy is to promote interoperability and provide the private sector the right tools and guidance to improve the interoperability of between solutions and different platforms. NIST intends to participate and support private sector activities to accelerate creation and adoption of a standard-based interoperable smart city platforms and solutions. And this IES-City framework is open and public document. Anybody can use it. They don't necessarily have to use all the tools, but they can pick and choose their concepts and how we did it as an example. And that's why I'm interested in participating in this group. Essentially, this private sector activities that the city platform discussion is crucial for the success of NIST mission, and it's crucial to bring this work that NIST has done to the next step, which is the adoption or implementation, or just even inspiring this private sector activities and commercial activities for interoperable smart city platform. So that's it. I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Soku. Very, very helpful. Maybe I can ask a sort of framing question of how best we can we can work with NIST here, because there's a lot of information here, and we'll take a fair amount of digestion. But let me give an example of something that we're working on that, and I'd like your sort of feedback on the best way to engage here. So we're working with a city that is working to pull together a series of transportation services through a framework, and that includes the public transit, certain parking facilities. Some of those vehicles are electric; they need charging. And how do they take these various services and have them interoperate with one another? How do they make sure that individual providers, so the parking providers can provide information about parking so as people can use them as park and ride, that people who are offering scooters or bicycles, maybe as commercial entities, can provide their information as part of a trip planner, so as people who are planning a trip across town can interoperate. The way I'm sort of seeing this is, if we can get the transaction platform correct and work through your IES-City framework, the IES-City framework should be able to help us identify those points of interoperability with those services, so as the parking data, the information is pulled together through the parking data, can interoperate with an application that might be doing that cross-city planning, and that there's probably a full implementation that needs to come behind what you're doing here. We don't have to do it collectively. We can do it individually on projects, but as long as we try and align those and we don't replicate them, they will interoperate. I'm not sure if I'm quite there yet, but I wanted to put that on a table because it's a practical example of where we are struggling. So there's both the interoperability within the city between services, and then if we get it right, the ability to take those services to other cities that have also worked within the framework. So I wanted to see your comment on that.
Yeah. So that's really two questions. They are related questions, but they are not the same questions. First one is, at the technical level, how do you discover, or how do you identify interoperability, or how do you encourage interoperability between transportation-related solutions? So that's where this technical analysis approach is going to be useful. And it's not that difficult. It's almost like a common sense. You ask these different solution providers to bring in architecture diagram. I mean, every solution provider should have architecture diagram. And then if you overlay each other onto each other, and using the spreadsheet or the decomposition metrics that we have, then it's a few or more points of technical interoperability we're going to emerge. Basically, what you're going to see is, out of, say, 20 different potential possible point of interoperability, you're going to check in marks, and you're going to see how out of these 10 solutions, 8 solutions have a certain PPI, and some potential PPIs has only 3. Only 3 solutions have some PPI. So obviously, the PPI that has 8 solutions, PPI that incorporates these 8 solutions, might be a better candidate. So you just have to do the analysis, and it's become pretty obvious once you do the and then you build the technical layer based on that layer, that PPI, and then that's where you can find interoperability. More important question is say transaction platform. So that's a little bit different question. That's where the zones of concerns comes in. Interoperability is a technical points of the in the layer. Now, zones of concerns involves more of the application or I would say practical the layer in terms of the customer perspective. So you have to first understand whether the cities are ready for those kind of layers. So that's where the application framework comes in. And then once city is ready, then you have to find out whether transaction platform is a commonly necessary zones of concerns in multiple cities or multiple solutions. So similar process of the analysis. And there may be case that maybe there are 10 different technology providers, and only one of them is interested or are even relevant to transaction platform. Then frankly, in that specific application, transaction platform may not be the right one. I mean, they may say, oh, that's not. But if you think, okay, out of the 10 solutions or 10 cities, they are using something related to a transaction solution. As I say, 8 out of 10 cities are using something related to transaction solution. Then, yeah, you are pretty sure that this application in this region, this transaction layer is important. So that's how you have to go about. And I know it sounds, some of them may sound complicated, but it's not. It's actually very common sense. Just decompose the questions and bring in multiple vendors or multiple objects that you want to analyze, and just lay down on the table and figure out what's dominant, what's the most popular component that many solutions are using. They may not be the same technology, but if they have the similar building block, then you can safely say that's the one to go.
Thanks. That's helpful. Any other questions? Mike, have you you're already working heavily? Eclipse is already working heavily in the IoT space, and you must be dealing with some of these challenges already, of these interoperability points within the IoT space. Is this ringing true for you? And is there a way that the Eclipse framework can help us bring sort of commonality and interoperability here?
Yes and no. So we have a great number of projects that implement, a lot of the standard protocols that are being used in various cases, but we don't have a complete solution yet. I would describe it, what we currently have at Eclipse is some really interesting building blocks for building open source solutions that meet these requirements. But I don't think there's anywhere yet where you could go and find a single platform that does all of this. Whether you're talking open source or proprietary, for that matter. But I think we have a lot of the building blocks, but not all of them yet.
Just a reaction that this is Roland Have, Ethos. Was already mentioned the Fireware platform in this presentation as well. If we look at that and the whole middleware and all the open source components which are there, it's quite complete. It's also part of what we offer as well if someone wants to use open source. So we see that as definitely as a complete foundation, at least as a framework and a platform, and I would say most of the components which are necessary nowadays in this kind of solution. So it's still in development. So Mike, in that regard, I agree. It's still new things will come and will be added. But there's definitely already, we think already a platform out there and a framework which is capable to cover all of these items.
Yeah, unfortunately, in the particular case of Fireware, the last time I looked at least, which is probably 18 months ago, they were using the AGPL for their license. Is that still the case?
That's a good question. I don't know exactly this answer right now, but definitely there's a lot of happened the last 18 months. So
Yeah.
I'll ask you to have a quick look at the fireware.org website and have a look, because it will definitely, I would say, cover for most of what we see of our customers. And we saw an example here in January as well. it will cover most of the items, most of the customers or opportunities out there needs. So.
Mhm. And I'd like to chime in too. This is Matthew Yarger from the IOTA Foundation. We're pretty much in the same realm to where we kind of meet a lot of these necessities, as particularly with the transaction requirements that you outlined as a zone of concern. And we're heavily integrated as like an open data commons throughout Europe already, and completely open source and a nonprofit. And we're working to integrate with US cities already as well, particularly Austin and a few of their partnering cities.
So I mean, I think those comments fit very well with where SOCWA was going, right? The objective here ought to be to have a clear path to recommend how those cities proceed. That leaves the best of all the things we have to offer open to them, right? That we're not closing those doors. And maybe the way to do this, this is a question, is that some of those building blocks, some of those framework components, we try and make in common. So as things built in different environments, be they FiWare or on Eclipse using IoTivity, those components can interoperate. So when a city lays down their transaction framework, they know which pieces they have to keep common. So as services developed in any of these environments can interoperate. Is that the right way to think about it, or is there a better way to think about it?
I think that's along the right lines. It's a lot of it just revolves around having that open platform that the different organizations and entities can kind of interact with. And in our respect, we've got the open API set up and the open source set up so that they can integrate into the application side, and we're focused on integrating in the hardware side as well. So we're just making the data available from the IOTA perspective. And we're structuring the data because as IoT proliferates, the data amount is obviously going to become overwhelming. And we need to structure that data from source. So we're enabling that mentality to where you can get access to the data in an open mindset while securing it throughout the mechanisms that we're implementing. And then all it takes is taking the applications and pointing them to the APIs and setting up a basic node interface to kind of interact with the data and pull the pieces that you need for your respective application. So we've seen this operating in an energy sector, we've seen it operating in mobility, supply chain, e-health, all the different aspects of citizens interacting with their city and cities interacting with their infrastructure have been made available, and the testing and the pilots that we're currently developing.
Thank you. Richard, is this? Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, is there any documentation specifically on the IoT devices, e-health, and quantitative health that you had just referenced? I don't think you actually said quantitative health, but I'm actually more interested in wearable health and smart technologies from a mobility standpoint. And so I just wondered, does the granularity of these frameworks go down to that level of consumer health data? And does it include those types of variables?
Yeah, definitely. From our perspective, I'm not sure, I don't want to speak for everybody else, but from the stuff that we're working on, it definitely does. And we have quite a few medical personnel throughout Europe that are very well experienced in that field that are working on integrating and advocating from that sector as well. So if you want to connect and get specific documentation or speak to any of them respectively, you can feel free to connect with me and I'll make the necessary connection.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Richard, maybe I can call on you because I think that the challenge here is becoming pretty clear. There are good frameworks, there's good technology out there already, and the real objective I think of this group is to make sure that we move towards some level of convergence. And I think this is largely the function that ONG tends to play in these groups is causing, creating the kind of collaborative environment in which we can identify where those points of interoperability are and form up groups to try and help towards interoperability, and then guide the cities towards how to implement in a way that maximizes the ability of groups like these groups to deliver services to them. Is that the right way to think about it, or is there a better way to think about it? That was for Richard solely. Richard, are you on?
He may be on mute.
The different Richard.
Oh, hi, Richard. Richard Beckwith. I was looking for Richard Soley. Maybe he's not on. I have a call with him later, and I'll try and do that. But that seems. Does anybody else want to comment on that? That seems to be the main objective of the group here is to bring the best of what we've got to offer together into some commonly agreed to framework that allows us all to be effective in addressing what is really an extraordinarily large market. And if we, I mentioned transportation, there's health, there's energy, there's water, there's waste, there's all these different areas, and a smart city is gonna have services in all of those areas that interoperate. And really the challenge is to make sure that when a city implements one service, like a transportation service, they're not shutting doors to that interoperating with an energy service that may be needed to charge vehicles or something. Sakwu, that's visible.
Oh. Jesus. Ow.
You can disconnect. You can just disconnect. That'll be fine. Anyhow,
yeah.
Any other comments or questions that?
Yeah, this is Yasunori Mochizuki joining from NEC, and first of all, I just wonder if you all guys could hear me.
Yes, we can. Absolutely.
Oh yeah. So Saku, I was interested in one of the slides which put up also the show the basic reference architecture of the synchronicity, and my understanding in synchronicity is that they're never trying to put up another platform concept, but they're always standing on the demand side, which are the cities, and try to come up with what they call a minimum interoperability mechanism, which stands for the open API and common data model and business transaction management. And so I simply had an impression that the synchronicity intent would have some shared motivation to what this IES-City framework is working upon. Trying to, first of all, there's having the understanding that there are multiple offerings on the IoT platform for smart cities, and trying to guide or provide the users, which are the cities, to have a good guidance, which a platform to be used by coming up with the information provided on the viewpoint of interoperability. So I just wondered if you have communicated with the synchronicity technical team, if this pivotal point for interoperability approach and those synchronicities minimum interoperability mechanism are working toward a similar directions.
So every example we have during this process or during this research share the same philosophy. Put it this way: if they did not share the same philosophy, they would not have participated in this process together. Having said that, I have not personally talked to Synchronicity directly because some of these works have been done through partnership with other agencies and other groups that I listed at the beginning of the conversation. So I may not have a direct answer or specific answer to your question, but point is, I think it's safe to say everything that we listed, every organization that we listed, pretty much agreed on the basic principles to work together and find a common set of interoperable points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Taku, this is John Fink. I'm looking at your slide, the Espresso ZFC example with the data lake in the middle and the access services on the top and all that. Actually, I think it's the next one when you brought up the layers over it. Yeah. So we had a meeting in Portland a couple of days ago with the rollout of the Portland Urban Data Lake, and that has 4 vendors: so Microsoft for Azure, Clairvoyant, Cloudera, and Esri, and this has evolved over almost 2 years. As a framework in which a lot of other things can happen, because there's about a dozen different smart city projects going on in Portland. So I'm just trying to, you presented a very comprehensive overview, and I'm trying to relate it to something specific here that we're working on, which is a little bit broader than just one application. And I'm just trying to think, how do we incorporate this broad framework that you're talking about on a practical level? I don't know if that's a coherent question, but do you have some thoughts on it?
Yeah, so the specific example we may talk about it as offline, but at a high level, framework, this NIST framework is not usually when we publish framework, it's not supposed to be a mandated document, or it's not supposed to be even a perfect guideline. It is supposed to be an example, or it's supposed to be a presentation of possible approaches. And the way that they use it in private sector can be in many different ways. One of the great example is a NIST cybersecurity framework. It is supposed to be a research document, but a lot of cybersecurity firms and private sector companies take it, and some of them just take only one piece of it, not the whole thing, and then use it for their own purpose. So that is eventually what's going to happen. But the way I see it is, in many cases, the companies and cities can, when they work together, or when they start the project planning process, they can look at this framework and say they can agree on some basic principles that is either presented or that is either mentioned in this framework. Say that I'm just going to practically say City of Portland and Microsoft to get together, then they can start saying, okay, let's first try to figure out the zone of concern, or let's start figure out the point of PPI. And then the way that PPI can be analyzed and identified is in the document. And when you bring in additional vendors, Esri or others, they can all sort of like call this around the same terminology and concept, and let's identify PPI first for the interoperability. That itself is a good use of framework. Obviously, this framework goes much more than that, down to the functional decomposition and everything. But you have to start from somewhere, and that is a good start, I think.
Thank you. Just one other comment. In the earlier calls in this series, there's been a lot of discussion about data sovereignty and who owns the data. And so if we think of that as a principle that would be maybe to the side of all of the framework that you presented, and equity could be another one, open source, whatever. So again, trying to relate your broad presentation to the discussions that have gone on in the previous calls, which I think you've been on some of those as well.
Yeah, so I think they are complementary. The technical interoperability is just one piece of the puzzle. To really come down to interoperability, that's, yes, you mentioned, we have to talk about data ownership, data sovereignty, and then also the bigger picture of the privacy and the even legal side of that. And that's not part of this framework. Again, NIST provides one small piece, very much focused on technical aspects of any type of interoperability. So what I'm presenting here is essentially trying to let everyone know at the technical level, this is why NIST is interested in this group. And when it goes to more of a policy level, probably that's not the field or area that I may be able to add a lot of value.
Great. And just to keep dominating here, just one other question. Could you comment a little bit about how NIST connects with other mission agencies in the U.S. government relative to these smart city developments. I mean, you've talked about that at GCTC meetings, but that it might be good to get an update on that if you're willing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So as you can imagine, as much as the smart city landscape is fragmented, U.S. government agencies are fragmented as long as it related to smart cities topic, and that's to some extent unexpected, because smart city is not just the one application. It covers virtually every agency that exists in the United States government: transportation, energy, and standards, and commerce, and even international collaboration, and so on. So the way we are trying to address the problem is there are a couple of venues or a couple of interagency collaboration discussion groups. And then that discussion group, it's not just one of them, there are multiple of them. And NIST plays a critical role in virtually every one of them. And the reason NIST is well suited to play a role is because we are very neutral. And then the work we do are not necessarily tied to one single application, or like energy or international collaboration and so on. So the way that NIST role works is like more of a facilitator, and sometimes providing convening role. And in some cases, because we look at a big picture, we can sometimes lead the discussion in a more productive way instead of looking at just one small segment of the smart city application. So that's why other agencies look at NIST to provide that type of leadership. Specifically, the way it works is, NIST is not necessarily a domain expert in everywhere. So if we do this kind of framework, we can only provide a principle level, a level of the principle, not the level of the actual specific applications or how they go about and in the field and do actual implementation. That's what other agencies should do, like transportation and energy.
Great. Thank you very much.
Soku, this is Yasunori again. May I ask a little bit, somewhat a different type of question? So I do understand that you're hosting GCTC now placed in some time in July. And in the preceding meeting that was held in the summer of 2017, I don't think this kind of IES framework related session was absent. But are you planning to put this kind of discussion to be included part of this GCTC Expo we held in July?
So the reason we did not have this in 2017 was because we did not have this document. It was published only about a year ago, so we didn't have it at the time. So we were working on it, but we didn't have it. There was nothing to talk about. So now we have this in the field, and if again the agenda is a little flexible. And it all depends on how much interest we receive from potential audience. So one way to think about the goal of Expo is not necessarily talking about frameworks, although it could be part of part of the event. The goal of Expo is to talk about projects, and demonstrate the technologies and solutions from the companies, and provide a venue for the municipal officials to collaborate with the technology providers. So that's the focus. We haven't thought about including this discussion into the Expo, but if there's enough interest, we can have either a sidebar event, or we have a pre-conference day, which is the July 10th, which we don't have any main agenda. That's sort of like an invitation-only workshops and seminars and so on, and we can think about doing something like this.
Saku, and
hey,
long time no see. But talking about interest, I for one think it's very timely for municipality officials to actually hear about this perspective. After we presented at the RSA conference, to elaborate on your overall. It's like a glue that has the big picture blueprint out. So similarly, it has implication for even cybersecurity and privacy domain as well. As we discussed right at the RSA conference last week, the current industry has a tendency to come in after something's already built up. So now, after seeing what you have shared, I was thinking that even for the cybersecurity and privacy, we could leverage what you have and then put forward something that is forward thinking, so that any municipality, if they are thinking about a smart city project or just setting up an infrastructure for a platform for such projects, then they have all of this framework, as you said, upfront for their consideration. And one component of it will have cybersecurity and privacy in it as well.
Yeah, so one thing that I know is that Portland is planning a GCTC Tech Jam event, Global Tech Jam event in September. And I believe, from what I understand, it has a opportunity to have a little more, have these kind of discussions. We can certainly have it in GCTC, but GCTC is, think of it almost like trade show, for the lack of better words. Is it like thousands of people come, or hopefully thousands, multiple. Typically, it's about 1,000 people, 1,500, but they come and exhibit. There are 100 exhibitors and speakers and so on. So another way to look at it is maybe we can ask Portland to have such as includes a session about like that, like what you just mentioned, and all about this kind of framework in Portland. It doesn't mean that we're not going to do it in GCTC Expo. It's just there, maybe there are additional venues that we can do this.
Lan, I'd be happy to work with you to make sure that happens. We certainly would like to cover data, and your supercluster would be great to pull into this and work with you on it.
Wonderful.
Excellent. Let me draw it to a close. We're almost at the hour. Next week we have sort of getting back more towards the blockchain work. Mick Bowman has offered to talk about work that's going on at Intel. Mick, you still up for that?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Look forward to it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much, Sokwu. This was really helpful. Thanks everyone for attending. It was a good meeting.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.